Hey admins, how we doing out there today? Day after Mother's Day. Hope everybody had a good Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to those women that are mothers, and hopefully the men were out there that have mothers and wives. They did something nice for them. Um, some lodges did some stuff, and that was nice. I always suggest we take advantage of holidays like that, and they do something nice for the women members. And all the holidays coming up. I mean, we should always be thinking about in advance things we can do for our members. For veterans, come certain holidays, things like that. Now, if we're thinking about planning on something and we didn't do a Mother's Day thing, don't do a Father's Day thing. If you didn't do a Mother's Day thing, do a Mother's Day thing next year, then do something for Father's Day. Anyways, I'm going to get through this video as quickly as I can because I've got a lot to cover today. Um, and for some of you admins that have been around for a while, when I get to the end, I'll let you know you don't have to go through this if you've seen some of this stuff before. But a few things we're going to cover today, I'm going to tell you real quick. We're going to cover Indiana server training certificates. We're going to talk about suspensions and suspending members, lodge membership campaigns, and then I'm going to cover the all-stat report at the very end. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. All right, here we go. Indiana servers training permits. That comes along with their liquor permits for bartenders. The excise is out, and they are looking at lodges, and they have found a few where they're expired compared to their liquor license, which I'll explain in a second, and they are fining those lodges. They're not giving warnings out. I think it should be a warning, but that's me and the government. The government's looking for money right now with those Indiana server training permits. So when a bartender gets their liquor license, they then have a set time to go get that also, the Indiana server training permit, and it is online on the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission website. It seems like the issue, and I never thought about this in the past really until this started coming up, the server training permit may not expire the same time as a liquor permit. I think this is an oversight by the government, but what can we do about it? It seems like what's happening is a bartender is going and getting their liquor permit and then going online immediately and doing the Indiana servers training permit test online also the same day. Makes sense. I mean, naturally, you're trying to get it all knocked out. Well, then you're getting the Indiana servers training permit back that day because you've taken the test that you printed up online and it shows that date. Well, then you sent off for your liquor permit, and maybe it takes a few weeks, a months, since COVID, even a couple of months before you get it back, and it's probably dated the date they processed the check and processed the permit, meaning the server training permit expires a couple of months before the liquor permit does, and that's where they're catching lodges. And again, like I said, they're going out, and we've already had this happen in a couple of lodges now, and it's an automatic fine. They're not given a warning. I mean, my personal opinion is most people, they should be lined up date-wise somehow because they're basically connected to each other, but that's just not the way they're doing it. So we need to make sure those Indiana server training permits are up to date also. Now, I'm going to the lodges and we're seeing that they're expired, and I understand that. One problem we're having, though, is we're not finding liquor permits for the bartenders out in the social quarters posted somewhere, and their Indiana servers training permit. Now, I catch some flack because the law says that the bartenders themselves are supposed to be able to produce those and should have them on themselves. They should, and you should be checking that on a semi-regular basis, whether they have it in their automobile because maybe they work multiple places, what have you. But they're supposed to show those. But let's have the safety net there, and just to keep the lodges out of trouble also, those need to be posted. Now, it can be a copy of their liquor permit. That's fine. And, of course, if you use Xerox, it's going to say void on there. But at least you have the information, the date on there. Same thing with the Indiana servers training permit. And that needs to be in a common area so that when the excise come in, they can see those. We've had a few lodges where they're locking them up in the office, or they don't even know where they're at, but they have them in a drawer somewhere. They need to be able to be seen by the Indiana excise when they come in. It makes it easier on them. If we're nicer to them, they're nicer to us, so on and so forth. So those need to be posted somewhere. Now, if you have several employees, you don't have to have a big wall with everything splayed out. You need to have their liquor permits up there so we can see them, and then maybe the Indiana service training permits, maybe they're all in one stack and attached to the wall somewhere. They don't have to all be spread out. But again, we need to have those out there so that the excise can see them when they come in. It should be posted somewhere near where the lodge's fraternal unit liquor permit is posted at also. So that's that. All right. Suspensions. We've had some big issues, and I think mainly because it's turnover in leadership in the lodges, but we're doing suspensions wrong in several lodges, and that leads to a few different things. If they didn't do their due diligence and do the right process, that individual can argue with Moose International. They contact me. I found out that it wasn't done properly. That makes that suspension null and void. We've also had it to where, because we've not officially or properly suspended somebody, but they told them 3 or 4 times now, you're suspended, but no paperwork's been done, and then they want to get rid of that member. Legally, they can't, because there's nothing documented that they've had trouble with that individual in the past, and it's also leading to legal issues outside the organization, outside with how do I put that? It's involving legal issues. It's involving their status in the lodge. It's involving lawyers and all kinds of stuff, because we're not doing things right, because we've cut somebody off or they've caused trouble and we told them to get out, but we never did our due diligence. So they go and contact a lawyer and say, they say I'm thrown out of the organization, which they probably haven't been, because if the lodge didn't do their due diligence, Moose International hasn't removed them from the organization, but they think they are. So they're going to get a lawyer and say, I've been removed and I was never officially cut off, warned, documented, or anything. And then they have to let that person back in. So here's the process we need to make sure we're following. When somebody does something in the lodge, and it becomes a decorum issue, we need to make sure the bartenders are filling out the incident report books. That even should be filled out even if they're just cutting a member off from drinking too much. They need to document that. They can't just say, Bob Smith's done for the day, go home. They need to document that, because what's happening is that individual becomes an issue. He's been cut off a few times and they try to suspend him, but nothing's ever been written up. We've got to make sure that's being written up. Witnesses lines are on there if they have witnesses. So we need to make sure those are being filled out. Now, you have an individual that's done something and they need to be suspended for whatever reason. The board then needs to have a conversation what steps they want to do if they think they're going to take the process to suspending this individual. You can always have a special board meeting at any time to discuss this situation, or it can come up at the next board meeting if it's not that dire of a thing. Let's say it's an individual who's been cut off a couple of times, or, has been cursing but wasn't violent in any way or something like that. It's not as urgent for that to happen. Now, when the board has that meeting and decides they're going to move forward, it is the administrator's job to send out a letter to the individual and let them know that they have to have a hearing before they get the termination of their suspension or whatever it may be. Now, Moose International, the bylaws just say that letter has to be just mailed out. It doesn't have to be certified or anything like that. And that's perfectly fine if it's not a major offense. But if there are major issues, this is just a Dan Evans suggestion, not a Moose International suggestion. But I would say you should probably certify that letter. That way they've received it. If it is a major issue and it's physical violence, or, someone had a knife or something very serious, and people may fear for their life of that individual coming in the lodge, that letter can state that they are suspended until they come to a board meeting and meet with the officers. That individual may never come in. That individual is suspended until he comes to that board meeting. And no matter what the suspension might be, let's say that the board's thinking 30 days for something, you don't give them 30 days from that point. They're suspended till they come in and meet before the board. Then the board discusses after that meeting with that individual how long the suspension is, and that gets added on to the entire time they've been gone. So it would behoove them to come in immediately as soon as they could. And we're going to go over the details about how that letter should go out and stuff like that. But again, if it's something that's also serious, though, besides certifying a letter and you don't want that individual in the lodge, I would also print up a letter, put it in an envelope with that individual's name on it, and have the bartender give it to them, or an officer give it to them when they walk in the lodge next time. Again, it needs to be in an envelope. It's not open for public for anybody to see. They just get the letter, they read it, they realize that they can't be in the lodge. Hopefully they don't throw a big temper tantrum, and they leave and they come back to the meeting. In that letter, though, there's a very specific order that things have to be done, and stated on that. And so I got my general laws book out here so we can go through it real quick. Also, that can be found online. And there's also a sample letter for suspensions on the Moose International site also, but it can be however you prefer to word it. But there are specific things that have to be in it, and that is the date and time of location of the officer's hearing. And while I'm on that, that letter needs to go out 10 days in advance for the meeting, because you have to give them a week's notice, and the extra 3 days are for mailing time. So we need to give them 10 days notice to when that meeting is going to be. A detailed statement of the alleged wrongful conduct, including the date and approximate time of the alleged incident, location, circumstances, and other information significant for the accused to be apprised of the charges. So you can't just say, hey, you're in here for your conduct the other night. It needs to be, you allegedly, pulled a knife, got into a physical altercation with another member, blah, blah, blah. But you have to let them know what the rule is, or what they're being accused of. The rule or regulation that was violated, so you have to put that in there from the general laws book, what general law they broke. And actually, it could also be a house rule, depending on what the house rules are in your lodge. Also, the right for a member to testify at the hearing. So they have the right to come before the board and give their version of what happened, their side of the story. That's why the lodge really shouldn't have a predetermined mindset of what they're going to do to suspend that person until they've heard that individual's side. They also have the right for the member to bring a witness to the hearing. So if they were somebody else that was there and saw what happened, they can come in and give their version to the board also. Something that the member doesn't have the right to. The member does not have the right to be represented. They can't bring a lawyer or someone to defend them without them speaking. This isn't a legal proceeding. This is a private organization deal. Nothing legal going on here. And they also do not have the right to confront or cross-examine any witnesses that are stating the opposite of what they did or didn't do. So that can also be found in 48.8 in decorum in the general laws book, but we have to make sure we're following that process. If we're not following that process, it's going to get the lodge possibly in trouble in the long run. But more often than not, what's happening is I have lodges that want someone expelled from the organization because they've caused all this trouble. Well, the first thing they do, they have to contact the Chief Compliance Office, but the Chief Compliance Office is going to contact me and say, hey, we need to see documentation of where, Bob Smith has done something to be removed from the organization. And then I go in to try to find that documentation, and lo and behold, well, no one ever wrote him up because they didn't, the president or someone on the board said, well, I'll talk to Bob Smith and we'll tell him that, he can't, he needs to cut down on his drinking, or he needs to watch his cursing when he's in the lodge. And then it's never been documented. And then there's the boiling point where the lodge is done with that individual, but there's nothing we can do about it because it hasn't been documented. Remember, if it isn't written down, we consider it that it did not happen. Alrighty. One last real quick thing before I let some of you go, if you don't want to hear the very end. So, lodge membership campaign. So we're starting the new year out, and every lodge is obligated to have a membership campaign. So just like the Moose International has the one, and their campaign is currently, make it happen. There's the calendar on there, and you can get prizes by sponsoring so many people when you're a preferred member. The Indiana Moose Association has the one right now where they get a tote and a possible trip paid to Indiana Day. But the lodges have to have one also. Some lodges have very good ones. Some lodges aren't doing anything at all right now. You are obligated to do that. And I will be coming and doing and checking that, especially when I'm checking now and warning people. But it will be in the lodge survey that I do starting at the end of the month and into June and July that will ask what the campaign is. So you need to get with your board and have some type of campaign and have it posted for your membership, whether they sponsor one person, 5 people, whatever it may be. And I always suggest using those mini campaign posters for each month and have a drawing. And if you're a preferred member, which a preferred member is just someone who has sponsored someone in the last year, but if you sponsor somebody that month, you get your name into a drawing and maybe win a gift certificate or moose bucks or a free dinner from the lodge, something like that. Again, it's up to you to come up with that program, but you guys have to have one. The last thing I'm going to cover is all stats, and for you administrators that have been around for a long time, I've already went 16 minutes. You don't have to stick around for this, but if you're a new administrator, which we've got several, it behooves you to stick around for this part of the video. So last Friday, I sent out the ending all stats for the last moose year. The moose year ended April 30th, and everybody was trying to get their numbers at the last minute and contacting me, wanting to know where they stood. Here's the problem I have. All the lodges, or I should say a bunch of lodges tried calling me the last couple of weeks and wanting to know where they're at and trying to get those numbers. You've had all year to do that. You have weekly stats that come out weekly. And then you guys should know come the 1st of April, here's where we're at, and we're 12 members down. We need to get 13, whether that be renewals, brand new members, whatever. And that's where we need to be at. And so you guys should keep track of that. Now, granted, some people can go online and pay, so you don't know that till the following week. But the last week, I have lodges calling me every day wanting that total. And I do work on the last couple of days, basically staying at home, trying to work and helping lodges get their plus ones. But you guys should have some idea, because now I'm going to tell you, when you look at your stats or you go online to look to see where you're at, and let's say someone pays online on Monday, or you guys paid through your LCL, paid for memberships on Monday. It takes a couple days for that to process, because that isn't even being, that charge isn't going through till midnight that night, and then so on and so forth. And it takes a couple days for that to pop up. So that's why we shouldn't be waiting till the very last day. We should kind of have an idea of where we're at early April, and then be able to knock that out within the first week of April, instead of waiting till Friday, the last day possible, and trying to figure out where you're at, because I could say in your all stats it shows that you're -2 and you're trying to get some, and you've had people online pay or whatever, then you overshoot it, and which is fine, or you undershoot it because you don't necessarily know where you're at. So try not waiting till the last minute to get those totals. That's why we, lodges that were already at a plus come 1st of April, that was pretty easy going for them to try to get those numbers. Now, all stats is a report that I only normally send out at certain times of the year. It kind of looks like this. I kind of folded the top so you can't see which lodge I have here. But it gives you kind of a breakdown of where the lodge is doing financially, membership-wise, Moose Charity is giving, and helps you to get your Premier Lodge Award. But not just Premier Lodge Award. There's other things we'll go into that are more important in here besides just that. I usually send these out at the beginning of the year, usually getting towards the last month, so you kind of know where you're at. And usually at the end of each quarter, usually I wait till all the lodges have their Heart of the Community in, so that I know that they've been reported, which you have to the 15th day after the quarter. But sometimes if all the lodges have already reported that, then I might get it out earlier. But this kind of gives you an update of where we're going, and if you printed one up, there could possibly be some red numbers on there if your printer prints in color to show negative numbers. We don't like red numbers on here, obviously. If you print one up, I'll kind of go over it with you quickly. Naturally, it's going to have your membership in the top left-hand corner. It's going to tell you where you're at and what your goal is. And while we're talking about that, some people have asked why the plus and minus number on here is one off or possibly off from your weekly stats. Your weekly stats is your actual number of active members, where you started at the end of the year before, your active, expired, and your dropped members. This is off one because it technically up there, it says your goal progress, which means you want to be at +1. So it's a little bit different of a number, and I forgot, and I always kind of forget when people ask me that. It takes me a while to remember that. I'll probably forget it before next year. But that goal process is one higher than your weekly all stats. So just for an example, say you ended the year +3 on your weekly stats, because that's really where you're at. You were 3 over last year, but your goal was +1. So on the all stats, it's going to show 2 over because you're 2 over your goal. So it's a little confusing if we're not paying attention. Also, I've had people ask about their weekly stats and how come their active or their numbers are sometimes different when it comes to active members and or renewals, or possibly the ending number from the year before. When a member is deceased and you mark them deceased, it takes one off your total number of members, but it doesn't affect your ending number for the year before. You're still going to be at that number. You're going to be down one now. But when members transfer, and yes, it's on lodges, and I have this problem all the time, where someone's transferring into another lodge, the incoming lodge did not do their due diligence and asked the initial lodge if that member was in good standing before they voted on them. And then when they do transfer them in, they don't let that lodge know that they did accept them. They've been transferred out of that lodge's system. Unfortunately, there's no way in our membership tracking of letting a lodge know that someone's transferred out. The number just kind of disappears. Now, when someone does transfer, though, and your number goes down by 1, your ending total for the year before also goes down by 1 also. So you're not really losing somebody. You're losing a member, but it's not hurting you for your total from the year before. It also has your retention rate on here, and retention rate we want to keep up at 80% or above. So when we're dropping below that, especially way below that, we've had that this past year in Indiana, really bad with expired women specifically, but we want to try to keep that up above 80%. And the reason why that's just the number they've come up with, but the science is kind of showing if you stay at 80%, because we know there are going to be people that pass away, there are going to be people that leave the lodge for whatever reason. If you stay at 80%, getting the +1 is easier, because again, it's always easier to keep a member than to find a new member. We have to make sure we have retention committees doing their job and contacting expired members, because 9 times out of 10, what's happening is someone's just forgotten that they to pay their dues. That's all it is. And they're more than happy to do that. Sometimes there are complaints because they've left the lodge, or they're at the lodge right now, or they feel like they're not getting their value out of the membership. But most of the time, it's just contacting them and reminding them. That's why there is a list that comes out of upcoming expired members, so we can remind them, because we want to try to catch them before they officially expire on the 1st and show up in those numbers. If they can renew their dues in advance, that's great. Also, with expired members, again, if we don't have a retention committee, we need to be bringing those expired lists to our officers' meetings, and I'm coming to them, and they're awful short. So there's no reason why we can't, give one phone number, one expired member to each officer, and have them give that person a phone call. There's a script that comes along with it, but it doesn't even have to be that. And even if that person doesn't talk to the individual, they can leave a message. And it's simply, hey, this is Dan Evans from the lodge, and we see you're expired, and we just want to make sure you were aware of that, and we sure hate to lose you down the lodge because we haven't seen you for a while. Please come in and pay your dues, or go online and pay your dues. That's all it takes. So it's, literally 20 seconds, 30 seconds for the whole thing. And there's no reason why officers can't do that, at least for one person at before each meeting. And again, they should be using that expired list, because if they know anybody on that list, they should be contacting that individual anyways. Also on here has your application goals for the year. The application goals is always based and then on the previous year, and then there's a certain percentage added onto that. An important one to look at is the preferred member list or percentage there. Moose International would like the goal to be at 7%. We know some lodges are very low, the 3% or 4%, because we understand that administrators or bartenders are kind of juking and kind of taking those applications and sponsoring. Sometimes they fall on a bartender or administrator's lap because there's nobody there. They need to be signed in by somebody. But really, you shouldn't be putting your name on an application as a sponsor if you don't know the person in some way, shape, or form, or know something about him. But what we have happening a lot is bartenders are coming in and taking an application when someone new comes in with another member, and excuse me, and then they're filling out an application, and the person who's already a member, is asking the bartender or an officer who knows the process, hey, did I fill out everything out? And then that bartender or someone else is taking the sponsorship line. We take that very serious, and that affects that that number, that preferred percentage point. So there's a contest coming out this year that's going to be covering that, and we want to make sure that number's higher. We've had some lodges that had a great percentage this year. We had several that had 9 or above, and that was fantastic, but there's a few out there that are very low. If it's down 2, 3, or 4%, you guys really need to look at what's going on and who's signing those. And don't get me wrong, some lodges have an individual that, they bring in a ton of members, and that's fantastic. We love that. But we don't want the bartenders stealing sponsorships from a member who should have gotten credit for that. Also, they're down here, just your active member history. I won't go over that too much. That's pretty self-explanatory. Up here in the top right-hand corner is your Heart of the Community reports, and what we need to make sure is happening there. We need to make sure we're filling something out. And again, I went on and on about this. It's not just more paperwork for the lodge to do. That's what we use to report to the IRS charity work that we've done. So we need to make sure we're filling those out and filling those out properly. If we're having trouble or getting no grades on some of those, we need to go and look at the list on how to report Heart of the Community. That paper can be found on the MI site too, but you've gotten those emails from Moose International before. I've sent them out, how to fill that out. And what we're having trouble with a lot, and I have lodges call me wanting to know why they've reported endowment 3 times in the quarter and only gotten the grade for 1. You are obligated as a lodge to send an endowment 10 months out of the year. And really, you should just be sending it in every month anyways. But in the Heart of the Community, you're only getting credit for what you've given that quarter. So if you put on there 3 different times, the lodge is getting credit for giving to the endowment. But then the second and third time, there's a big no next to it. That doesn't mean the lodge isn't getting credit for the dollar amount. It's just not getting more points on the Heart of the Community award scale. So you're either going to put it in 3 times, and you're going to get the yes for the credit for the first one and no for the second 2, or just go ahead and combine all 3 in there, and that way as one entry. Remember, details are important on there, and we need to make sure they're going in the right categories. We have lots of people putting activities on youth awareness that might be, say, like a local kid sport. Youth awareness is a specific project from Moose International with like the Youth Congress, and that money goes to that program. That's a very specific program. If you have something like a Little League team or something like that, that's going to go under local volunteer or local community stuff at the bottom of the page because it's weighted different. So we don't want you to actually put that into youth awareness and then you not get credit for it. There was another thing in that I want to talk about the grading too, but oh well, that slipped my mind. But anyways, so that comes out, and that has to be after each quarter. You have to the 15th of the month. So we are on, today is, I don't even know what today's date is. Today is the 9th. But we need to make sure those get filled out, and that's in LCL. And if you're a new administrator, get a hold of me. I'll show you where that's at, but we need to make sure those are getting filled out. Also on there, it'll show if you had a Moose of the Year, which every lodge should have a Moose of the Year. Shows whether or not you got a Premier Lodge the prior year. It shows if you had representation at International Convention, which you have to have representation at International Convention to get a Premier Lodge award. Administrators and presidents leadership awards are based on that only if they go, and then there's other requirements for that as well. It shows your overall Moose Charities giving on there. And the lodge gets credit for all Moose Charities giving. So you're obligated to turn in endowment monthly. So when you have a 9 o'clock prayer, you've had a meeting and you've collected that endowment, that's an obligation to turn that into Moose International because someone gave you $1 or whatever dollar amount it is, knowing that it's going to go to Moose Heart, Moose Haven, Moose Charities as an endowment. And that's where that money has to go. But the lodge may give to other things, the Mac Center, other programs that Moose International has. They may just give money to Moose Charities, and it's not even earmarked for anything. It's just we're giving it to Moose Charities to do whatever they want. That's where you see the overall charity giving down here, and it may be different than what you expected for endowment, because I've had lodges say, well, there's more in there than what endowment we've given. Well, there's a few other things the MAC project would have went in there. If your members donate to Moose Charities, and they've put their MID number on there, you're going to get credit for that also. Several members donate directly to Moose Charities, and that goes in this total also, because quite often there will be an odd penny amount, and lodges are like, I don't understand why there's a weird amount. We know we didn't give that. There's several things that go into that. And for Premier Lodge Award, again, you have to be $1 more than last year, and that's your overall giving, and or whatever the average is. And the average this past year was almost $9, but it really dropped this past year. It's only like 6.5 now, so it shouldn't be too hard to hit the average also. Also on here, it shows whether or not you had any orientations or enrollments. The lodges have to have a combination of 6 of those every year. Those have to be reported. Again, the lodge gets credit if they offered them, even if nobody showed up. And that's the problem we've had, is lodges are offering them, not putting them in there to report. So I don't even know to come check to see if it was offered or not. Also on the other side, it talks down here about how many times endowment were given. So your Moose Charities overall giving can go up, and the lodge didn't give an endowment, and that's the confusion. This is specifically for the endowment, and the lodge is supposed to give endowment at least 10 months out of the year to get credit for Premier Lodge. Again, you should be turning it in every month anyways. And I always suggest that should go out the same time you're paying the statement of accounts or the AR payment. When you're paying that, you should send off your Moose Charities, your endowment giving also, whether that be in a check directly to Moose International, whether that be going online and paying it online. It's however you do it, but those should be done at the same time. That way it's done. We have a lot of lodges struggling. They try so hard to get to the end of the Moose year, and they're worried about their numbers, and then come May, and we're now into May 9th, much later, that check's going to go in and be received in June. You're going to get credit in June, and you're going to be already a month behind automatically on endowment and kind of put you in the hole. I had a lot of lodges. It looks like right now my territory in the south, we're going to have 6 lodges possibly with Premier Lodges, and it looks like Mark says he may have 5 up north. He's not for sure just yet. I know of another half a dozen in my territory that are not going to get the Premier Lodge Award because one quarter wasn't reported, or not one enrollment or orientation wasn't done, and or they only gave 9 months, so they missed by 1 on giving endowment to Moose Charities. And so because of one little technical thing they didn't do, they're not getting a Premier Lodge. And we want to get as many Premier Lodges as possible because it's a nice thing. You get a coin. I know people think it's like a gold star, and who cares about a gold star, but it's nice to be able to come back to your lodge members and say, hey, look, here's how good the lodge has been doing. We got a Premier Lodge, and that's a big deal. So we want to make sure that everybody's trying to get that as much as possible. I have went 35 minutes. And I will be quiet. I will try not to bring any more up, and I will go back to trying to get these videos back to being only 5 or 10 minutes or less. Everybody have a good day. Thank you very much. Take care.